This episode is a special that I'm doing in partnership with the Spill Festival, which is running in Ipswich between the 23rd and the 26th of October. Welcome to Big Bad Beautiful Brains. I'm James. Since I was diagnosed at the age of 45 with autism and ADHD, I've been on a journey not only to discover how my brain works and how to look after myself, but also about other people's brains and how they look after theirs. I'll be speaking to people from all different backgrounds, all different ages, and all different experiences to understand how they think and how their big, bad, beautiful brains work. This episode, I'm talking to Robin Deacon, an artist, writer, filmmaker, and educator whose work spans performance, film, and critical reflection. Over the years, Robin's performances and videos have been presented around the world, across Europe, the US, and Asia, exploring themes of memory, documentation, and the blurred boundaries between life and performance. After more than a decade teaching and leading the performance program at the School of Art Institute of Chicago, Robin returned to the UK in 2021 to become the artistic director of Spill Festival, one of the UK's leading festivals of experimental performance and live art. Robin, hi.
Hey James, nice to see you.
Thanks for coming in.
Yeah.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. We're about a week out from Spill Festival, which is the organisation that I run. I'm artistic director, and we've got a really lovely 4-day festival in Ipswich coming up, and it's just in the final sprint to that.
Fantastic. And we're doing these episodes in the kind of lead up to the Spill Festival week happening, and really looking forward to seeing the program you've got on.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I know that you're talking to some of the artists that we're working with. So, I mean, I like to think, because I'm coming up for, I've been about 4 years in the role now, and I came to Ipswich kind of sight unseen, and so part of running the festival has been figuring out the town and Suffolk as a whole. And so I like to think with this program I feel like I've kind of landed in a place where that balance between international artists coming in from the outside and bring their perspectives, but getting them to engage with stories and narratives about the town and the people of the town. I think we've hit a really good balance with that.
That's really great. Can't wait to see what's coming up in the next few days.
Right.
What's a song or sound that's been stuck in your head recently?
It's interesting because when, I know you shared some of these questions with me in advance, and I collect music still. I'm quite an avid collector of vinyl records. But what was kind of strange was, rather than thinking about music and sound in its own right, my mind immediately went to sort of sound in relation to images, I suppose. Again, I'm in my early 50s. I turned 52 about a week ago. And so I'm conscious I'm at the age where I still have this relationship with material objects and material recordings of things. So that's not only vinyl records, but I still collect films and films on Blu-ray, DVD, and so on. And it's quite an obscure one, but there was a film that I saw, probably in my 20s, when I lived in London. It was a film called Killer of Sheep, and it was by a director called Charles Burnett. And it was made in the 1970s. It's a beautiful black and white film. I think it was shot in 16mm. And it's just this kind of, this camera, the narrative is quite loose, but one of the characters works in an abattoir. And you could just see his day-to-day struggles and the circle of friends and family that he works and lives with and rolls with. But the beautiful thing about the film is the way that it uses sound and the way that it uses music. And my understanding was the release was delayed for quite a few years because they couldn't get clearance on a lot of the music that he'd used. But it was re-released recently, a newly restored version. And there's this beautiful section where it's just an image of the sheep in the abattoir, sort of just moving quickly across the screen, and there's just this beautiful piece of classical music that underpins it. And now I think it's a Gershwin song, piece of music. I'm not 100% sure. I think it's Lullaby by Gershwin, but there was just something about the combination of this beautiful classical music and this image of these sheep running across the screen in this beautifully clean black and white that has really lingered and reconnected with a film I hadn't watched for many, many years. So there's something about the interplay of the sound and the image that has, since I sat and watched it a couple of weeks ago in my lounge, I've just been circling back and thinking, oh, I just want to play that bit of the film again, just to hear that music and the sound again.
That's nice, and I think it's an incredibly good example of how powerful the accompaniment of music with visual images can be, and how much it can communicate to people, or how the change of the music can completely change the narrative of the visuals as well.
Oh, absolutely. And just to be clear on that, the title of that film, Killer Sheep, always whenever I talk to people about it, they think it's like a horror film. It's absolutely not. It's just this really beautiful, meditative, almost dreamlike images of Los Angeles, kind of in the Watts area of Los Angeles in the 1970s. It's such a beautiful film.
What's something you've been curious about lately?
I mean, this might actually be readable in the Spill program, and maybe a few other things we've done the last year, and some of the artists and who we've been engaging with. There's something about the Suffolk landscape, Suffolk as a place, that I've been thinking about a lot, and its kind of weirdness, the strangeness of it, and there's multiple ways of coming at this, because I'm currently learning how to drive. And so I've always lived in cities and so relied on public transport. But as time has gone on, I've realised living where I live, when you want to get out of Ipswich, I mean, you can get the train to London or Norwich quite easily. But all of those other interesting in-betweeny bits, public transport you don't really want to rely on. And so everyone says, you got to learn how to drive. So I've started doing that. And I'm really excited about what it's going to be to explore Suffolk a little bit more. And obviously, I've seen bits of it. We've gone on kind of walking holidays on the Suffolk coast, my wife and I. But there's just something about being located here. And like I said at the beginning, I came to Ipswich sight unseen. I came to Suffolk sight unseen. So there's something about discovering that landscape and being able to independently do that, which I'm really thinking about a lot. And there's a keen anticipation with that, I think.
Nice. I think there's one of the probably less useful tourism messages for Ipswich is it's a really easy place to leave. But I mean that in the sense that it's very easy to get down to London. But you can also be in the coast in 10 minutes, or you can be in the middle of a forest in 10 minutes, or you can be kind of out exploring the countryside very easily and very quickly from the middle of what's a fairly kind of built up town.
Yeah.
It's quite easy to get to other places from where you start in Ipswich.
And what's also really kind of inspiring is how, again, the artists we've worked with have kind of engaged with the landscape of the place. So Mark Poslet, the artist, one of our big commissions for the festival this year, walked the Suffolk coastline, and I've seen some of the drafts of the film and sound piece he's made from that, and really incredible portrait of the landscape and its an evocation of its history. And earlier in the year we did some film screenings with Emily Richardson, who has done some amazing films that really beautifully depict sort of landscapes around Orford, around Sizewell. And so, that it has become a bit of an obsession that, and I can trace it back to really enjoying reading W.G. Siebold, and Mark Fisher, I know, had written about his experience of being in this area. So in a sense, I had experienced it through language and literature, but then being here, it becomes something quite different.
Yeah, and there's always been a very close connection between the rural elements of Suffolk and creativity. Historically, you look at Benjamin Britten, Brian Eno, and Ralph Fiennes in terms of kind of performance, and him coming back and doing The Dig as a film and reconnecting with the Suffolk accent. And Charlie Haylock, I think, who kind of taught him, a linguistic coach, to teach him how to kind of use the Suffolk dialect in its boldest and roundest form. I think there's all, and equally to Maggie Hamling and her sculpture up in Aldborough, and what happens at Snake Maltings as well. There's a very deep connection with creativity expression and the environment that Suffolk brings.
Yeah. I definitely sense that, and I think that the fact of that lying within the Suffolk landscape, and again, not necessarily within the city or within the town. And I think often, that's where I've lived, it's where I've studied, and often those kinds of arts movements that I have been most interested in have been like in cities, like what New York artists were doing in the 70s and 80s. All of these things were really inspiring to me. But maybe now that I've been here, seeing how that different kind of rural landscape can activate things.
If you had to describe your brain in 3 words, what would they be and why?
Can I reduce it to 3 words? What did I write? I wrote about mystery, memory, and dreams.
Nice.
And I can kind of spin those out a bit. So start with mystery. So I guess, my brain maybe is a bit of a mystery to me. And perhaps, that's a kind of, that can be, for an artist, that can be quite useful, because part of the artistic process or your motivation for making art is figuring out, what you think and how you think it, and materializing those things. So I think, I've occasionally, having sort of dabbled in the odd meditation app, I suppose the more recent sort of revelations I've had was, that kind of chatter that you have, that we all have, like when, as soon as you start to think about, okay, I'm going to be mindful, empty my brain in some way, you become aware of how much static how much noise there is, and so that was quite revelatory, I think, to me. I talked a bit about, I mentioned the word dreams. Maybe this is a little more in retrospect, but I did have a period where I became fascinated in dreams and the landscape of my dreams. And it's interesting using the word landscape when we've just been talking about Suffolk. But there was a period a few years ago where I became very interested in transcribing the dreams. And I realized after a while of doing it that I wasn't really interested in interpreting the dreams or thinking about what they meant particularly. I always assumed that it's just the churn of my mind, just sort of sorting things out, like it's just sort of organizing its filing cabinet in some way. But I got very, very interested in what it meant to transcribe things, and if I was writing something, those moments where I felt like I was perhaps misremembering things or starting to embellish something to make it sound more interesting. Because I went through a period of posting some of these things on Facebook. I got quite good at remembering and detailing things. So I remember someone telling me, like, the best thing, if you want to transcribe your dreams, just do it as soon as you wake up and don't move too much. They had this claim that if your body moved too much, you would somehow dislodge the little fragments of memory you had. So I remember kind of posting those things and those little fragments of my memory. And then I was conscious that certain elements of the dreams were kind of I was starting to interpret them and think, oh, it feels quite personal. And then I became a little unsure as to whether I wanted to share those things in the space of social media. But, I've had a few recently where I thought, no, I should maybe get back to doing that, because that was fun.
And when you were transcribing the dreams, were you able to interrogate what the cause of the experience in that dream was into a kind of into a real experience of something you experienced recently, and then it was your brain processing that in a dream space, and you were able to connect the two?
Oh yeah, some of it was very, very clear, very, very obvious. And I remembered the period that I'm talking about is when I lived in the US. I did live in America for 10 years before I came to live in Ipswich. And I remember at that time I was very acutely conscious of being kind of an outsider, and having to go through the US immigration process was kind of, psychologically quite torturous sometimes. And I do remember sometimes there were these dreams that I would have about really kind of being in scenarios where there was some very intimidating American person barking orders at me or telling me what to do or not letting me cross a border or something. And so those little anxieties about when you live in a country but you don't properly live there, I remember that being something. And then I think there are little recurrent things, that people who reappear in my dreams. There was a filmmaker friend of mine, Stuart Croft, who died quite a few years ago now. He will sometimes come and visit me. That's how I view it. He'll sometimes come and visit me in my dreams, and we'll chat. And that's sometimes quite an interesting one, because I wasn't. Stuart was a good friend, but I wasn't close to him. But for some reason, he's someone who seems to visit me.
Still acts as a good sounding board.
Yeah.
And what was the third?
Oh, the other one was just memory in general, and maybe that relates to Stuart and other things like that. Maybe taking out of the dream element. I think as I'm getting older, I think my teens and 20s are all about collecting things, collecting objects, collecting records, books, and all of those things that gave a sense of your identity. And then maybe again, as I get older and maybe my identity is a little clearer and I've managed to distinguish between those things that I collected to look cool to my friends and those things, no, actually, I really like that music, or I really like that book, or I bought that record because I thought it maybe looked cool. All of that stuff I feel like I'm getting rid of, and I'm holding on to these objects that kind of map something out. And realize that, I don't really buy contemporary music or stream or download contemporary music. A lot of the stuff that I listen to or watch, again, films again, are kind of little marker points that kind of orientate me to where I am now and where I was. And so that, that those are those objects that manifest my memories, records that represent times in my life, films that really meant something to me, are kind of very much part of that as well. Yeah.
What's something you're still figuring out?
I've left quite a lot of things quite late in my life. Like learning to drive. I mean, look, I'm 52 years old, and I suppose I'm particularly, living in America for 10 years. I mean, my wife was able to drive out there. I wasn't. I sometimes think back and think, oh, that would have been a very different experience living in a land that has that kind of culture of driving and distances being so different. So, yeah, I think I'm a bit of a late. I'm sometimes quite late to things, but often that's the case with artists. The artists tend to do things a little bit later than like normal people sometimes, and I'm kind of interested. I think that can be quite useful earlier in your life, but sometimes maybe that does kind of catch up on you a little bit, later on in your life. So driving's one of those things, and yeah, explorations around. Think about where I am with education, because I worked for so many years before I came to Spill. I was a professor at an art school, and I'd had other jobs as kind of lecturers in other kinds of places and universities and so on. But I was always struck by the fact that, I don't have a PhD. But at the same time, I can kick that further back in my life that I studied art. I went to art school, but I don't have an A-level in art. And there's a lot of things that I feel like I'm really kind of good at, but I'm not sort of necessarily trained in or haven't taken the traditional route in. And as I get older, I feel like I want to loop back to some of those things. Maybe I should take an A-level in art before I do a PhD.
Why not? What's something about everyday life that's easy for you but hard for others, or the other way around?
I think it's I think when we were talking a little bit about this before, it's the world's in a kind of in a really dark place, and but maybe it was always that way. I sometimes don't know, is it the world or is it me or whatever else, but sometimes it does feel peculiarly dark at the moment. But I still sometimes feel like I have this kind of fundamental like optimism in some way, and maybe that doesn't necessarily always chime with people, because I think we've got every reason to feel, oh, this is all looking quite dicey at the moment. And I think I mean, maybe in a more, immediate sense, we're also talking a little bit about, the run up to the festival. And, there's this sort of real tremendous sort of excitement and energy around it. And I know that I tend not to be an anxious person. And I think it's sort of interesting, kind of like in that context where there's a lot at stake with the festival, that, I think that kind of sense of calmness or anxiousness I don't have, I think can be kind of like, there's the team do such amazing work and carry so much on their shoulders. I never want them to think that, hey, whatever, I'm just chill about
Robin,
it.
come on, you need to panic more.
Yeah, exactly. And again, so, the panic can be good, and that can be an energy that can be really positive. But I think it's the same thing, with me as an artist who worked a lot with performance, that I realized at a certain point, like I never really got nervous before performing. And sometimes, that was great when I was younger. But then as I've got older, I've wondered more about, well, what does that signify? Does it mean that I don't feel like there's something at stake? Do I not feel that there's something that's, important, that the nervousness is an indication of there being something at stake? I don't think there's always something at stake when I do perform or make a piece of art, but I kind of used to view that as a bit of a superpower, that I wouldn't get nervous. But maybe now I look back at that and think, maybe that would have kept me in check a little bit, or made me think a little bit more about what I was doing.
Have you found any approaches that make the world work better for you?
And maybe this relates a little bit to artistic thinking about, what you do as an artist. And I'll sometimes look back to these sort of periods, I don't know, maybe in the early to mid 2000s, where I was incredibly prolific in terms of putting my work out there as a really young, ambitious artist. And I look back at some of that stuff and think, wow, that was great, that was fun. And then I'll look back at some of it and think, oh, I shouldn't have bothered with that, or that was a bit ropey. And so I think, that a certain kind of slowing down, and I used to really crank out performances. I do 20 odd more, 20, 30 performances a year. And sometimes there were things that I remember this after one of my performances, where someone came up to me and said that, oh, it looks like you rehearsed that for minutes. And I thought it was very funny at the time, but maybe as the significance of it as a kind of slightly backhanded compliment was funny to me. But I think there was maybe a certain point, maybe around the later 2000s, I did have these longer gestation periods on things, and my creative process became a lot more stretched out. And I felt like, well, if I'm not cranking stuff out every 5 minutes, it doesn't mean that I've disappeared as an artist. It just means I'm working on something that needs a little longer. And a couple of projects that kind of unfolded over a number of years rather than a number of minutes. Or hours. That definitely felt like that worked better. And again, I think about this in terms of aging, that I look at videos of myself performing in the 1990s, in the late 90s, early 2000s, and just even the physical capacity to do some of the stuff that I was doing. The work I started with was very physical. And as I went on, I did, become more interested in writing and film, and maybe a more cerebral approach to it. So, yeah, I think that's slowing down a bit and thinking less in terms of, I've always got to be doing. Sometimes the doing can be happening kind of in the background when you're not consciously doing it. And then, a solution to a creative problem can appear.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know if you agree with this, but I think there's particularly with the age of social media and the feeling of the urge to produce content all the time and put it out in the world, can kind of take you down the wrong path a little bit. And sometimes it is having that ability to pause and create something more considered.
And and again, and I don't want to feel like I'm just grouchy old middle-aged man, because I think I do find there's elements of social media I do find really super interesting, and the different speed at which people work. And obviously the experiences I had working in education and that I still have, the students that I engage with, you just see, these differing ways of seeing the world. And again, different conceptions of time, differing conceptions of that relationship with being online. And I think there was this commonality that maybe we all have, anyone who uses social media, that you got this push and pull between this desire to be seen, but also a kind of desire for privacy as well. And I was really interested in watching some of my students kind of grapple with that, about a fear of being overexposed, or not getting too many, like posting something and it not getting likes, and then relative to something blowing up, something going viral, and that can go to quite a dark place. And weirdly, what I was saying about dreams and posting these dreams and realizing that I was also felt like some of those transcriptions of dreams were quite revealing sometimes, and then feeling like, oh, I've really laid something out and it would like 4 likes, and I'd be like, that's kind of good, because there was a sense of, I value that privacy, but there was also a part of me that was like, I really shared something with you there and only 4 of you. So that push and pull, I think that crossed, to me, that possibly crosses generations.
And I guess that it kind of hyper accelerates the artist's experience of perhaps putting out pieces of work on a lower frequency and having the same experience of, I really threw myself into that and all I got was this.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's on a kind of super fast speed.
Yeah.
And that's fine. But you have to kind of want to be in that space, or not feel like you're forcing yourself into that space.
Totally. But it's a structure that we kind of decant our everyday thoughts, little creative things that we've done, or whatever it is. And I don't know, I think more and more people are maybe starting to question it, like the attention economy, and it, to what degree this is about keeping people's eyeballs on stuff so you can be sold more stuff, or that question of distraction. I think we're all grappling with that.
And the political narrative that comes with it.
Yeah.
As well as the kind of, everything's fighting for attention, and some things are louder than others, and bad news travels faster than good.
Oh, yeah. And an economic model for those things that's sort of built around keeping people distracted and angry.
Yes. Yeah. Keep them looking at something else while keep them busy, keep their minds moving on something else. Going on to more positive things. What's a small thing that always makes you smile?
Probably my dog was the first thing that came to my mind. And like, I mean, I grew up with pets, but generally in my family would have pets that lived in cages. We'd have gerbils. I had a rabbit when I was a student. And then when we first moved to the US, my wife, we were, she'd always wanted a dog, and I didn't really have a point of reference with that because I'd never had a dog. And at a certain point, it was like, yeah, okay, let's do it. And we went around and went to some rescue centres and eventually found Frankie. And that moment where we went to met quite a few dogs. It's like bad online dating. You'd meet people and say, I don't think so. And then it was that moment where Frankie comes into the room, and it's like, yeah, that's the what we both agreed. Yeah, he's the one. Let's take him home. And so he was there for the whole decade we were in the US, and he made it back for the first year we were here, but then he was ill and passed away. So he was a funny one. Again, had a difficult upbringing, which I think still resonated throughout his life. But I think I used to have the image I had of dogs were this kind of unruly thing. And it was initially, and there were moments well, what have I done? What have we done bringing this dervish into our lives? And then as we kind of figured each other out, he just sort of became a real piece of our lives. And I think that presence that he brought was really, really valuable, I think. And then obviously we had a bit of downtime, and now we have another lovely little dog, Pepper, She is a weird spaniel terrier mix, and again, very different personality. But there is something about, I don't know what it is about dogs. I think a lot of the people, a lot of my colleagues at Spill are tend to be cat people, and so often just the anecdotes we come to the office about the cats and the dogs are very, very different. And but there's something about yeah, I couldn't imagine having a cat because they just go out and just do their own thing, and I'd worry. I just worry about them. Whereas at least the dog, I know where my dog is, and I know he's always pleased to see me when I come home. And or she's always pleased to see me when I come home.
Yeah, I grew up around cats,
Yeah.
and it's very different relationship. I've got 2 dogs now.
Mhm.
Our first dog passed away in 2019,
Yeah.
and we were kind of absolutely crestfallen about it, and resolved that look, well, let's have some time without a dog and
Mm.
see how we get on. And then 4 weeks later, we'd found a puppy, because it was just having that companionship of a dog is just, you can't compare it, and cats just don't do the same thing. Cats have an expectation. I think dogs come with no expectation,
Yeah.
and it really shows. And right now we've got another dog a few years ago, so we've got 2 absolutely chaotic dogs, both very different characters, but do bring so much to the family unit. And I think it is very important to have that around the house, and you notice it when it's not there anymore.
Yeah, I remember being that period between dogs of kind of how quiet the house was, and not in that kind of realization. It wasn't Frankie wasn't necessarily a loud dog all the time, but that just conscious of that sense of, he was so palpable of there being this sort of strange absence. And I mean, we took a little longer. I mean, it was nice to be able to sort of go on holiday and not worry about, either having to take the dog with you, or the dog being boarded, and the expense of that, or the just missing him. So we did manage to get a bit of traveling done in the interim that was really great. But yeah, there was that was quite a pivotal moment, I think, in terms of an experience of, the grief we experienced. I think really highlighted the joy that it did bring, having the animal. So yeah.
If you had a free day with no plans, how would you spend it?
Well, maybe it would be something enjoying with the dog, and with my wife. I mean, thinking of differing modes of transport, I think maybe again, because of the not driving yet, a lot of our holidays are walking. And so that has often been a nice way of sort of, again, kind of starting to find that connection with the Suffolk landscape, but knowing that when we can drive, that will kind of maybe expand outwards a bit. And, you're not reliant on whatever taxis or trains or buses that come once every 3 hours or whatever. One of the things that we were talking about, my wife and I were talking about recently, was well, we've discovered the ferry that goes from Harwich to the Hook of Holland, and a few months ago we took that, and we took the night ferry and got a cabin, and it was really great, and it was just such a strange experience in some ways, of how close you were to Europe. And then there was something about, then we discovered, oh, you can take dogs on the ferries. Oh, we should do this with the dog next time. And we've been talking more recently about sleeper trains as well. That idea of traveling at night, traveling in a cabin, and like the idea of, a free day with no plans. Day becomes night, and just that thing of being transported through the night and going to sleep in one place and waking up in another place, and it's another day. There's something about that process, and having the bed, everything in this sort of small little space, for conversation, for watching the world go by. There's definitely something about that I think we both really like. Yeah.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough when I was 15 or 16 to take a train to Poland.
Yeah.
And just kind of watching the world go by, and your tiny little cabin stays the same, but everything around you is changing, and just kind of making the journey part of the experience rather than trying to get the journey out of the way as quickly as possible and get to the destination.
And you don't get that in the same way with, I mean, plane travel, I kind of, it's a bit love-hate really. It is, I'm sitting in a seat and people are bringing me food and drinks and stuff. That's quite nice. But then at a certain point, there's nothing really to see other than, I mean, the clouds going by can be quite nice. But yeah, in a similar way, traveling through Europe on trains, and the experience we had traveling in the US on trains. Sometimes we took a trip from San Francisco to Chicago, and just seeing the changing of the landscape and actually seeing that and experience those changes, even changes. Certainly in the American trip, the distances we were traveling, these sort of changes in weather patterns, you'd see the kind of balmy West Coast, and then you'd be on the train for, like, it was nearly 3 days, and then by the end of it you were back in the snowy Midwest, and it was just really sort of fascinating seeing that sense of time and distance really being writ large in a way that on a plane it all gets a bit compressed, and you lose those visual markers.
What's something that always makes you lose track of time?
This question was an interesting one because I was trying to think about when I really lost track of time in a really profound way. And I think maybe it's been a while. Maybe it has been a while. I remember I've had a couple of experiences over the years on doing artist residencies where I think Spill also has a residency program we do, and I feel really kind of passionately about it because I feel like I've experienced as an artist how that kind of withdrawal or that removal from sort of everyday life can really cause these great leaps in what you're doing. And a couple of examples of where I remember there was a really lovely residency I did when we lived in America, at a place called McDowell, which is in New Hampshire. And it was quite a long form residency. I think I was there for about 6 weeks. And you were basically given a cabin. And there was a main building you'd go to, and they'd serve you breakfast. And I think they'd stop serving breakfast about 7 a.m. or something. So you'd have to get there early to start the day. And then you'd go back to this little studio that was dotted around the grounds, and you just have a day to yourself in these beautiful grounds with kind of deer occasionally walking by. Someone would come in a little truck at some point and bring you your lunch. And then the evening, if you wanted to, you could go and sit and have dinner with all of the other artists who are on this residency. And I do remember the experience of doing that for 6 weeks, where it felt like everything kind of slowed down, and all of those things that usually are kind of clattering around in your head just started calming down a bit. And then I'd sit at my desk and then realize an afternoon had passed, and that was really wonderful. And I remember there was one particular instant where I looked up and it was dark out. And it was a genuine shock that I'd been so consumed in what I was doing, I hadn't even noticed that. But that's so rare, those experiences, and I've been blessed in my life, even if I never experience anything like that again, if I never do another residency in my life, that was such a profound sort of experience to have had.
What's the best advice you've ever been given?
It's hard to, this was a really difficult one. It's hard to pinpoint, but I remember it's a bit of a cliche sometimes. Like I said, I worked in education for quite a few years, and often people will say, "Oh, I learned so much from my students," and sometimes I hear this said, I kind of roll my eyes a bit, and it's like, yeah, of course. It's a bit of a cliche. But the example I'm going to give does come from a conversation I acutely remember having with a student where we were talking. It was a student I knew when I taught in Chicago, where I taught when I lived in the US. He was a writing student, and I just remember him talking about, we'd talk quite a lot about what you need to make art or to be creative. And like, I was really conscious that certainly at that time, a lot of the art I was doing was really fiddly. I had, I think I was doing a lot of stuff with old analog video decks and doing all of these things with with technology that was a bit old and unreliable and would break down, and you'd be lugging this stuff around, to get to the next show, and it'd be so much to be carrying. I really felt like I just had this weight on my back. And I just remember talking to this student, and it wasn't so much advice that he gave me, but we were talking about how we worked, and he just said something about writing, and he just, like, all he needs is a room and a thing to write on, and that's it. And that's all he needs. And I just remember the way he articulated it resonated with me so strongly at that time. And like maybe a few more years later, I've kind of maybe got more to that point where, the thing I'm most interested in doing is writing, and I'm conscious of what kind of minimal utensils you kind of need for that. But I remember back at that time, I was like, oh, that would be nice, just not having to think about all of this stuff that made up my work as an artist. So I just remember hearing that from this student who he just seemed to be talking from such a kind of liberated place. And I remember that felt like, although he wasn't dressing it up as advice, I think I read it as such. I took it that way because I think, yeah.
Now, sometimes where the best advice can come from is that it's not necessarily dressed up as advice, but you can perhaps interpret it in your own way and learn from it.
Inspiring. It was definitely inspiring. And again, just coming from this person who, and again, there are those interesting moments, as much as I was saying, it's a cliche when people say it. It is an example of one of those moments where the student-tutor relationship kind of flips, and I'm like, oh, actually, that I'm listening to you now and what you're telling me, because that I've learned something from that. And God knows where that student is now, George Olken. I don't know what he's up to, but yeah, just if you're listening, George, thank you.
Hopefully he hasn't surrounded himself by technology. He's still writing it all down.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things I've come to realize is that I spent a long time trying to figure out how I best worked. And I'd always try and find a piece of technology that would be the thing that would help me, or I'd surround myself in kind of tech to do things for me.
Yeah.
But then I suddenly realized the easiest thing for me to do to keep track of what I need to do is just to write it on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
And I just need a pen and paper, and I write my list down, and it's a real thing, and I don't need notifications and reminders and technology to do the most basic of things, which is just kind of keeping myself on track.
Yeah.
What's something you're excited to learn or try in the future?
Well, on one hand, I was going to say I'd refer you back to driving. I mean, I used the term liberation before in terms of that what that student was telling me, someone talking from this sort of liberated sort of position. And I don't know to what degree there's some kind of liberation could come through that ability to move of your own, a little more of your own volition, rather than being subject to train timetables or whatever else. But that was I still love train travel, but there's definitely something about what I'm hoping that will open up for me. But knowing that all of that's starting to change, and maybe part of me is wanting to do that before everything goes driverless, and if the technology, if that is where we're headed, then that idea of being behind the wheel may be a kind of vague memory of a thing that people used to do, and now we rely on technology to do it. I mean, I don't know how many years I've got left, or what the speed of that technology is. But it's become a bit of an obsession, I think. And do you know what? It just reminded me, talking about this thing about transportation. I remember one of the first things I did when I left university was I applied to work on the London Underground as a train guard. And I got interviewed, but I remember that they didn't have this sense I didn't think they really understood why someone with a first class honours degree in fine art wanted to do this, to work within that context of public transportation. But it just flitted into my mind there, because I know the route from being a train guard, you'd then become a train driver. That would be the next step. And there were periods in my life, not as a little childhood ambition, where I kind of really liked the idea of that in a strange way, like just driving a train, that being your job. That'd be nice.
After you've done your A level, then that's maybe something you can kind of work towards after that.
Yeah.
What's one thing you'd like listeners to take away from this conversation?
I mean, if we're framing it in relation to the Spill Festival and what my role is, I think it's nice for me to be able to talk from the perspective of someone who organises the festival, advocates for other artists, but still manages to sort of, I think I can still meaningfully call myself an artist. And it's hard sometimes. I think it was the same when I worked more in education, that you had your teaching over there and then your studio time over here, and sometimes those things could be a little bit in conflict. But I think it's important to sort of understand that all of those things that I'm talking about in terms of creative process and my own experiences of that, I think it's important that those things feed into what I do with Spill and with my job, because I think it's important for arts organisations to understand artists and what their motivations are, as screwy as those motivations can sometimes be. I think it's important that that there is that understanding that there's logistical stuff, there's administrative stuff that within the sector that we're all having to grapple with, but then there's also this kind of slightly messy stuff that you can't quite articulate, or stuff that's a bit outside of language or meaning, that we still had to find a way to engage with. And I think I'm kind of lucky that, because I've been on both sides of the fence, that I still pride myself on still being able to see both sides of those experiences.
And final question. So this episode's coming out during Festival Week. What's next for you?
So in the short term, I've got a meeting where we're signing off on some posters for the festival, some marketing stuff. At the festival launch, I'm doing a short performance piece, and I have to find some quite unusual props and objects for that. And I'm trying to remember, actually, when we last did the festival in 2023, whether it was one of those things that was over within the blink of an eye, or whether you were really kind of in the thick of it. And I have memories of kind of both states of mind sometimes. So I'm kind of excited about what that's gonna feel like. Because I'm so excited about it, because again, I'm so proud of the program, and I think it just speaks to something that I think I've been trying to sort of get to. And then that's the sort of maybe the medium term. Well, I mean, this is all short term, I guess. And then once the festival's done, I'm going to go to Orford for a nice walking holiday with my wife and the dog. And I think, again, maybe that loops us all the way back round to those explorations of the Suffolk landscape that some Spill artists have been doing, but also that I'm really interested in doing as someone who lives and works here now.
Thanks, Robin.
Thank you.